Hey BookTube friends, welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about the 3 books that I read this week. The first book I want to talk about is Marilyn Monroe, The Final Years by Keith Badman. And this is a book I buddy read with Sandy over at MsReads A, so I will link her channel in the description box. But the best part about this book was probably reading it with Sandy, because she is such a thoughtful and discerning reader and just a genuinely nice person. So she really enhanced my reading experience, and we both, I think, left this book with very similar opinions and reactions. For starters, the author's writing style and attempt at research was a bit of a disappointment. There were quite a few typos, which definitely interrupted my reading rhythm. So all of my thoughts on this book are really clouded with some questions about the author's credibility. That being said, I am very interested in Marilyn Monroe, and in particular her connection to the Kennedys. So obviously I was in for this book. The author also seemed to minimize a lot of instances of sexual assault that appeared to have happened in Marilyn's life, and I found this a bit disturbing, and it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. So it just felt like the author was inserting his opinion on a lot of these events rather than facts and research. So that really was a problem for me with this book. Throughout the book, I did red flag instances that I found particularly disturbing, and it just so happens that all of the red flags had something to do with Dr. Greenson, Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist. And I did know that she frequently visited a psychiatrist. I think we all know that at the end of her life she was heavily addicted to sleeping pills and medication, which of course would end up contributing to her demise. But I really had no idea how involved Dr. Greenson was with her professional and her personal life. The first part of the book that I flagged has to do with Marilyn's housekeeper. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, actually did not have a background as a maid or a housekeeper. Her background was as a psychiatric nurse, and it appears that she sought employment with Marilyn at the behest of Dr. Greenson. So in all likelihood, she was Dr. Greenson's spy, and he kind of used her as a handler for Marilyn. If you read this book, you will see lots of references to the fact that Eunice Murray doesn't do a good job of keeping house. She's not very in tune with Marilyn's needs. She doesn't actually do the grocery shopping. Half the time Marilyn's refrigerator is completely empty. So these are things that you would assume a housekeeper would do. But Eunice Murray doesn't. She does seem to take advantage of Marilyn's generosity and uses her position to get employment for other family members. The second red flag I noted was an incident where Dr. Greenson hits Marilyn in the face during a heated exchange, and he hit her so hard that she ended up with a black eye and had to go to the doctor to make sure her nose wasn't broken, and this actually prevented her from going into work for several days. Now, I had an idea that Dr. Greenson was fairly incompetent considering Marilyn's tragic end, but I had no idea that he was abusive. This, of course, is just ethically unconscionable, and I couldn't get over this. This incident really struck me. To cap it all off, Dr. Greenson is at the death scene when one of the responding officers comes, and the responding officer notes Greenson's suspicious behavior. Greenson appeared to be very sarcastic. He also had, according to the officer, a smirk or a leer on his face, and his actions were in stark contrast to another doctor that was on scene who had only prescribed Marilyn one prescription and was unaware of all of her other prescriptions that she had from Dr. Greenson. This other doctor appeared distraught and genuinely remorseful for his part in Marilyn's demise, whereas Dr. Greenson, who met with Marilyn almost every day for several years, seemed relatively unbothered in contrast. And of course, meanwhile, Eunice Murray is on her 3rd load of laundry, and I know different people react differently to tragedies, but her behavior and Dr. Greenson's behavior just seems very odd. This author's take really seemed to confirm what I've always thought about Marilyn's death, and that is she probably died as a result of an accidental overdose, but the behavior of the people at her scene makes it clear that those around her were at the very least negligent, and they wanted to cover up or hide their part in this. This book didn't really reveal any shocking information for me concerning the Kennedys. This author does seem to back up what I've always heard concerning the JFK-Marilyn affair, which is it was a one-time deal that was really not that notable. This author does reveal a bit more about the communication between Marilyn and the Kennedys in the months leading up to her death, and it does appear that she called the White House switchboard several times in the month leading up to her demise, and she did not have a direct line to Bobby Kennedy. She did not have his personal number, but she did contact him through the White House switchboard. Now, this on its face might seem very suspicious, but when you look at some of the circumstances at that time, it's really not. Bobby was actually in negotiation with the same studio that Marilyn was negotiating with to make his book, The Enemy Within, into a film. And Marilyn was in the midst of a pretty tense contract negotiation herself, so it appears she may have been seeking Bobby out for some advice in those contract negotiations. And of course, he is the Attorney General, so he could have offered her some legal advice because there was a pending lawsuit regarding breach of contract in relation to the filming of Something's Gotta Give. This book really does cast suspicion on three people in Marilyn's life, the first being Eunice Murray, who was in the house at the time of Marilyn's death, and her behavior after the death is extremely suspicious, to say the least. The second person is, of course, Dr. Greenson, and then the third is Peter Lawford. According to this book, Peter Lawford may have been the last person to speak with Marilyn on the phone, and some people believe that she actually appealed to Peter for help, that she recognized she had taken too many pills and made a cry for help to Peter Lawford, and he did not follow up with that. And that is something that we know Marilyn had done in the past. She had taken too many pills in the past and then called someone for help, and she was rescued. But I would really have to look into Marilyn Monroe's phone records and the timeline there and really look at that a bit more. Eunice Murray was in the house, so naturally you would think she would be someone that Marilyn could cry out to. There's definitely some questions around the circumstances of her death, and then of course the scene after her death, and the timeline of, as far as when Eunice Murray called the doctors, and then the timeline between when the doctors arrived and when they called the police is extremely weird. You wouldn't think that the first person you would call when you discover someone dead in the house is a studio executive or a psychiatrist, but here we are. This book left me feeling really sad for Marilyn, but it also left me with a greater appreciation for Joe DiMaggio and also for Pat Newcomb, who was Marilyn's publicist. These are two of the only people who seem to remain loyal to Marilyn even after her death, and they never tried to profit from their association with Marilyn. And if what this book is saying is true, Joe DiMaggio's last words decades after Marilyn's death and at his deathbed were, "Now I'll finally get to see Marilyn again," which is just heartbreaking. So definitely a great reading experience. I wouldn't call this a definitive biography. I do have the Norma Jean book by Lawrence Giles, and I'm curious to see how much this book actually leaned on that one, because he did mention it a couple of times. And you would think, since this book was written in 2010 and the Giles biography was written in 1969, that this one would have access to declassified documents and more information. So leave me a comment if you guys have any other great Marilyn biographies that you've read. The second book that I finished this week was Volume 1 of the Gulag Archipelago by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, and obviously this is a pretty heavy book. It is a chronicle of the author's experience in a Soviet Gulag, along with the experiences of people that he met and accounts that he was given by other prisoners. From the very beginning of this book, Solzhenitsyn brings the reader in, and it really helped remind me that this was originally an underground publication that was being transferred from reader to reader within a 24-hour period. The writing style of this book also reflects that sense of urgency because he uses a lot of exclamation points, and he really has a conversational style many times throughout the book, which I very much appreciated. The author starts by describing the anxiety and the uncertainty around the arrest, which could pretty much take place anywhere at any time for any reason. He also describes a sense of relief that some people found after they were finally arrested, and that really speaks to the sense of alertness that everyone had to be in 24/7. The torture and the sad absurdity of this entire Gulag system is really laid bare in this book. And at certain points, even the interrogators and the executioners recognize the ridiculousness of this whole system, because at one point a man is arrested for stealing a spool of thread, and in the indictment they write it down as 200 meters of sewing material, because they recognize 10 years in a Soviet Gulag seems absolutely crazy for stealing a spool of thread. At one point, an interrogator actually tells one of the prisoners, I know, none of this happened, but they insist on it, kind of imploring him to go ahead and confess. This author does a really great job of exposing the horrors of the system, but also examining the psychology behind it, and not just the psychology of the prisoners, but also of the interrogators and the executioners. It's a really interesting look at human nature, and he acknowledges that the line between good and evil really cuts through the heart of every person, and that it's just human nature for all of us to seek some sort of justification for our actions. I was kind of shocked to hear the prisoners in the gulags could see the stupidity of Roosevelt and Churchill's inability to secure Eastern Europe from Stalin. So that kind of shocked me at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I recognized that the prisoners in the Gulag were probably the most equipped to recognize Stalin's intentions and his absolute evil. At certain points in the book, I did get kind of tired and bogged down because you're reading a lot about torture, and it's psychological, it's physical, it's emotional, and that can be a bit draining. But just when you hit a wall, Solzhenitsyn will come out with some very profound examination of what it is to be human, and I think there are a lot of lessons in this book about putting more stock in experiences and things you learn and relationships than in things you own, because one of the first lessons that the prisoners in the Gulag learn is that they don't own anything, and if they do have something with them, any sort of possession will be stripped, it will be stolen from them, if not by the guards, by the other prisoners. And so if you want to have a rich life that can't be stolen from you, learn languages, read literature, talk to people, actually listen, and it's those things that sort of enrich your life. So I'm hoping to read the second part of this next month coming up, so we'll see how that goes. The last book that I read this week was Death Coming Up the Hill, a novel by Crowe, and this is a young adult historical fiction which is written in verse. The premise behind this book is really interesting because there are a total of 16,592 syllables in this book. There is a syllable for every American soldier who died in the Vietnam War in the year 1968. This entire book covers the year of 1968, and it's written in haiku, which is a very interesting way to write a novel. It's a very effective storytelling method, especially for people who are reluctant readers, and I always support trying to make history more accessible to students, and I think this book does a really great job of that. We follow a high school student as he navigates a very tense home situation between his mother and father, who are two completely different ends of the political spectrum, and he also is trying to console his girlfriend who has a brother who's missing in action in Vietnam. So we get to see a lot of very pivotal events from 1968 through the eyes of this character, including the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the assassination of RFK, the riots at the Democratic National Convention, and of course the deepening conflict in Vietnam. This was a very quick read, very interesting read, and there were several things that the author does with numbers throughout this book. So not just the total number of syllables, which were symbolic, but there are other things that he does with numbers which I thought were pretty clever. So got a lot of really exciting buddy reads coming up in the next couple of weeks, so I can't wait to get to those. I hope you guys are having a great week. If you are reading anything great, please shoot me a comment and let me know about it. And thanks for watching, guys. I hope I'll see you in the next video.